From our studios at historic Arnold's Park Amusement Park, it's Okoboji Broadcast with Jeff Thee.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, whatever you want to call it. I am Josh Burns. I'm with the Iowa Utilities Board. Before we get started here, just want to make sure that everybody in the room, can you hear me? I want to make sure acoustics are good. I want to make sure everybody can hear the questions, everybody can hear the answers. Anybody feel that audio is not good, let us know. A little housekeeping here before we get started. First things first, emergency exits. If there was an emergency, simply follow the exit signs, the lighted exit signs, or exit as you came into the building. As far as a tornado shelter goes, I would, as best as I can see, I would utilize the men and women's restrooms on either side, and there is a kitchen area back in here. It's an all-block building, or all-block wall as well as no windows, so that's where I would go if I was recommending to people. A few other things. The land agents are over here along the wall. To make this go smoothly, I would please ask that you do not visit with the land agents until after the presentation, since they are in the same room as the presentation that's taking place. It could make it difficult to hear if we have sidebar conversations taking place with the land agents during the presentation. And so we want to make sure that everybody hears everything. We want to make sure that the same information is shared with everyone. I would ask that you silence your cell phones, put them on vibrate. If you need to take a phone call, I would ask that you step outside the room and take that phone call and have that conversation. I'd also ask that any questions that you may have to please hold the questions until the end of the presentations. There will be a portion of this which is the question and answer time. And again, it just makes the process go more smoothly if we have some method to the presentation. We do have a microphone that is set up directly in the middle here, and so when that time comes, I would ask that you use the microphone. I know that the rows are a little bit longer here this morning. We do have a mobile microphone, so if you have a hard time getting to this one, we can have Summit Carbon staff bring you a microphone if you have a hard time getting to the one that's set up here. But I would please ask that you just don't blurt out your questions, because not everybody in the room would get to hear the question that's being asked. And again, I want everybody to hear everything that is being said here today. All right. Does everybody have a copy of the packets that on the front? Let's see here. The front one is yellow. It's a yellow sheet. Does everybody have a copy of this? If you do not have a copy, please raise your hand, and my IUB staff will bring you a copy of this packet. This packet is extremely important. It has all sorts of landowner rights, legal rights, contact information. Extremely valuable packet for you as we move forward in this process. So if you do not have a packet, please raise your hand, and my staff will bring you one. And with that, I do have IUB staff with me here today. I have Ms. Gail Beach with me up front here. She is an attorney with the Iowa Utilities Board. And then I have Sam and Chuck Burgundy and blue shirt back there. When we get to the question and answer portion, if you have a question that we need to follow up on with further information, I may have you go to the back of the room, provide them with your contact information, so that we can get those questions answered for you. I've been very impressed with my staff back in Des Moines. We have had questions like this in the first week. We typically are doing 2 public information meetings a day. So this is the first one for today. It is not uncommon for people's questions to be answered by IUB staff by the time we get to our next presentation later today. So the turnaround time in that has been very quick. So we are acting as quickly as we can to get your questions answered. All right, the Iowa Utilities Board is conducting this informational meeting with the specific purpose of informing potentially affected landowners, you, with essential background information on the proposed project and route, and to describe your legal rights before the pipeline can start negotiations. You will also be provided with information on actions you may take in order to participate in this process. It is approximately 12 p.m. Thursday, September 23rd, 2021. We are in Spirit Lake, Iowa. The purpose of this meeting is to provide information regarding Summit Carbon Solutions, LLC's proposal to conduct 20.20 miles of hazardous liquid pipeline in Dickinson County. This is part of an overall 706-mile pipeline throughout the state of Iowa. The Iowa legislature has established procedures which Summit Carbon needs to follow to obtain a permit for construction, operation, and maintenance of a hazardous liquid pipeline. This meeting is the first step in the permit process as required by Chapter 479B. And I should pause here a second. As I mentioned the Iowa legislature, I would like to point out that you do have Representative John Wills in the audience today, and I know that we also have some of your elected officials by the way of county supervisors here today. So just to point out some of the elected officials that are present. One of my responsibilities today is to verify that Summit Carbon has met all statutory and administrative rule requirements. At the end of today's presentations, I will make a declaration as to whether or not Summit Carbon has complied with Iowa law. The agenda for today should be on this slide here. We will be providing you with a description of the Iowa Utilities Board. We'll provide you with information about the Office of Consumer Advocate, provide you information or a summary of the permit process and the legal rights of landowners, information about the project presented by the company, and finally a question and answer session at the end of the presentations. During the question and answer period, you may ask Summit Carbon representatives about the project, and you may ask me about the Iowa Utility Board's procedures. The following items are included in your handouts. The IUB's informational meeting presentation, which provides you with information about the process and procedures. Statement of property owner's rights, that's the green sheet. I will be referring back to this green sheet later in the presentation. This green sheet is an important document prepared by the Attorney General's office to inform you of your rights. Information on how to file comments. Iowa Code Chapter 479B, which is the Iowa rules regarding hazardous liquid pipelines. Board rules at Chapter 9 regarding restoration of agricultural lands. And a portion of that is frequently asked questions about eminent domain. So what is the Iowa Utilities Board? The Iowa Utilities Board is an independent regulatory body. It is composed of 3 board members. Each board member serves staggered 6-year terms. No more than 2 of us are from the same political party. We are appointed by the governor and we are confirmed by the Senate. Current board members are Chair Jerry Huser, Board Member Dick Logier, and myself, Josh Burns. While the IUB primarily regulates the rates, safety, and service of utility companies, we are also charged with issuing permits for various types of infrastructure projects such as this one. The board's decisions are based on evidence presented to the board and on law. Board actions may also be reviewed by the courts. The Office of Consumer Advocate. Today we have with us Ms. Jennifer Easler. She is the Consumer Advocate for the state of Iowa, and I would ask if she would like to make some comments.
Thank you, Board Member Burns. I'm appointed by Attorney General Tom Miller. My office represents consumers and the public generally in all cases that come before the Iowa Utilities Board, including this one. We're really early in the stages of our review of this case. The petition for the permit has not even been filed. So we're still in the information gathering stage, just like you are. We will be filing testimony in the case, and we will review all of the comments and objections that do get filed with the board in this case. We'll be looking at the route, the safety, the land restoration plan, things of that nature. If you have any questions about the role of our office in the proceeding, there is a handout in your packet. And feel free to stop me after the meeting. So you can contact me at this number, or I will stick around and take questions either during or after the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, the permit process. I'll go over the hazardous liquid pipeline permit process and law, including legal rights of landowners. A permit is a grant of authority by the Iowa Utilities Board to build, operate, and maintain a pipeline. Information on the permit process and law, as well as your legal rights, are included in your informational packet. The first step in the permit process is for the company to request informational meetings be scheduled in the counties where the pipeline is proposed to be located. A requirement for notification of the informational meeting is that Summit Carbon identify the corridor within the company wishes to place the pipeline. Notice is provided to all property owners within the corridor. Therefore, in many cases, a landowner may have received notice to attend today's informational meeting because their property is within the corridor but not part of the proposed route. An informational meeting is scheduled for 30 counties. Summit Carbon cannot begin to negotiate any easements with landowners until the informational meeting for their county has been completed. All 31 informational meetings must be completed before Summit Carbon can file a petition for a permit. The route may change within the proposed corridor, and I recommend that you follow the proceedings in the docket and IUB's electronic filing system. I'd also point out that I did say there are 30 counties, and we have 31 meetings. One of the meetings is going to be held virtually. So if you know of somebody who could not attend today's meeting, whether they had a scheduling conflict or maybe they didn't feel comfortable being in a group of people, there will be a virtual meeting. It's October 12th, and it's 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. And so if you go to the Iowa Utility Board website, you can find that information of how to log on and partake in that virtual meeting. The company cannot file its petition for permit with the Iowa Utilities Board until at least 30 days after the informational meetings have been held. After the petition is filed, the Iowa Utilities Board will set a scheduling conference that establishes a schedule for intervention by parties, which could be landowners, and for testimony and a hearing date. Notice of the hearing will be published for 2 consecutive weeks in each of the affected counties. And at the hearing, the IUB will hear evidence in favor of or opposing the project. Any affected landowner may file comments either for or against the proposed pipeline as part of the Iowa Utility Board's review process. Phone calls or verbal communication will not be considered as part of the official record. Only written comments will be considered. If you do file comments, please reference the docket number identified in your packet, which is HLP-2021-0001. This helps us to know what project you are referring to. Comments may be filed at any time in the docket. So one thing to point out today with this meeting, this is what we consider the informational meeting. There is no court reporter here today. There is no record that is being kept here today. So anything that you say, any questions, comments that you may have, and you share those with us today, that is not part of the official record. And so the record is what we use and utilize as board members to make our decision on the case. So if you want comments to be part of the record, we need you to file those within the electronic filing system to make those an official part of the record. Easement agreements. An easement agreement is a legal agreement that allows one person to use another person's property in certain specified ways. An easement provides rights to a company to locate a hazardous liquid pipeline on private property. It does not transfer ownership of the property. And that has been something that has come up in a few of the public information meetings. So just to be clear, the easement does not transfer ownership of the property to the company. Landowners may contact an attorney or receive assistance from family members or friends during negotiations of the easement terms. Landowners may negotiate the use of their land or specify their desire for placement of facilities on their land as they negotiate. Landowners have the right to ask for the pipeline to be moved to a different location. An easement may be either voluntarily granted or obtained through the use of eminent domain. Prior to obtaining an easement, the company may enter on the land for surveying purposes, after giving 10 days written notice to the landowner. The company must pay for any damages resulting from the survey. What is eminent domain or condemnation? The right of eminent domain may only be granted by the Iowa Utilities Board after a public hearing. Notice of the Iowa Utilities Board's hearing will be sent by the company through certified mail to landowners and parties in possession of property for which eminent domain is requested. If the IUB grants eminent domain, the company may obtain easement rights after a compensation proceeding. The County Compensation Commission, under Iowa Code 6B, determines just compensation for property rights taken by eminent domain. So this amount is not determined by the Iowa Utilities Board, but it is determined by the County Compensation Commission. Frequently asked questions about eminent domain are included within your packet. Owner's rights. Included in your information packet is a green sheet that has a statement of property owner's rights put together by the Iowa Attorney General's office. There are 12 property rights included in Chapter 34 of the Attorney General's Administrative Rules. These rights apply to owners of record who may have property acquired by condemnation and come from Iowa Code Chapter 6A, 6B, and 316. If you have a pen with you, please circle the following numbers on the green sheet. Those numbers would be 1, 5, 6, and 10. Again, those numbers are 1, 5, 6, and 10. If an easement on a property is condemned, number 1 would apply, and rights or numbers 5, 6, and 10 could apply. These rights address procedures in condemnation taken by the court-appointed Compensation Commission in determining the amount to be paid to the landowner. Please review and read this sheet, as it is very important because it explains your legal rights. Land restoration and the county inspector. The IUB has adopted rules regarding the restoration of agricultural land during and after pipeline construction in 199 Iowa Administrative Code Chapter 9. A copy of Chapter 9 is also included within your packet. The company will be required to submit a land restoration plan when it files its petition. The plan must comply with the requirements in Chapter 9. Landowners will be able to view the plan in the Iowa Utility Board's filing system and file comments regarding that plan. As part of its decision in the case, the IUB may approve or require modifications to the land restoration plan. The IUB may impose additional land restoration requirements based on the specific details of the project. Landowners can negotiate their own restoration agreements with the company, but the terms must be consistent with the IUB's rules and they must be in writing. Landowner comments regarding land restoration may be filed using the Iowa Utility Board's comment form. Information on how to file a comment is also included within your informational packet. The County Board of Supervisors, they will appoint a county inspector to inspect the construction of the pipeline for compliance with the approved restoration plan or with any negotiated restoration agreements. And I did visit with your county supervisors prior to the meeting, and they're in the process of acquiring that individual. My understanding is waiting until the completion of this meeting to move forward. The company is required to provide the name of the county inspector to all affected landowners prior to the commencement of construction. The county inspector may temporarily halt construction if the company is not in compliance with the land restoration plan. If the company were to continue to violate the land restoration plan, The County Board of Supervisors may petition the IUB for corrective action or civil penalties. The company is required to pay for actual property damage caused by construction or maintenance of this proposed hazardous liquid pipeline. Damages are considered different and separate from easement payments. The company is required to designate a person to receive inquiries or damage claims from landowners. Damage claims are received and decided by a court or by a county compensation commission after the County Board of Supervisors has declared construction to be complete. The company may include a provision in the easement agreement addressing damage settlement procedures. Safety inspections. Hazardous liquid pipelines are inspected by the Federal Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, also known as PHMSA. For more information about PHMSA and its inspection procedures, we have included that website within your packet. So if you want more information on how that happens at the federal level, please visit that website. And finally, the IUB contact information, that also is included within your packet. If you want to make electronic filings or electronic comments, you would go through that Iowa Utility Board website and go into the electronic filing system, which we also refer to as EFS. And that electronic filing system is where you would file your comments. We do have a customer service team back at the IUB, and if you are having difficulties getting comments uploaded or filed, they will also walk you through that process. They are extremely helpful with that. So before I turn over the microphone to Summit Carbon personnel, I'll explain what's going to take place next. While Summit Carbon makes its presentation, I will follow the Iowa Utility Board's checklist to make sure and determine that the presentation was made by the petitioner, Summit Carbon, and has provided you, the landowner or interested party, with the information you would require to make an informed decision about the project. The checklist I am using is based upon both statute and rules governing hazardous liquid pipelines in Iowa. If there are unanswered questions or areas where I believe additional information is required, I will require Summit Carbon to answer those questions. If Summit Carbon is unable to answer the questions here today, I will require the company to file the information in the Iowa Utilities Board's electronic filing system under the docket previously identified as HLP-2021-0001. When I have determined that the petitioner, Summit Carbon, has answered our questions, we will take questions from you, the landowners. Summit Carbon will now introduce its personnel and make its presentation. And again, I would ask that all questions be held until the completion of the presentation.
Thank you, Board Member Burns. I'm Jimmy Powell with Summit Carbon.
Good afternoon. My name is Jake Ketzner. I've lived in Iowa for about 30 years and currently reside in Dallas County.
Good afternoon. My name is Jesse Harris. I also work with Summit Carbon Solutions. I live in rural Dallas County, and I've lived in Iowa for about 35 years.
Thank you, Dickinson County, for having us this afternoon, and thank you to the IUB and OCA for being here as well. Just a couple housekeeping items before we get kicked off. At the conclusion of the meeting, we'd really appreciate it if you could meet with those individuals over there with CLS. They're land agents, and they have maps of your individual parcels, and they'd be able to answer any questions you have about your specific land. And then as you walked in, you most likely picked up a map of the county. So please, there's other information at the Summit Carbon table as well. Up on the slide now is our agenda for what we'll cover today. Summit Carbon Solutions was formed in 2020, and we are headquartered in Ames, Iowa. The Midwest Carbon Express is a $4.5 billion project to create the largest carbon capture and storage project in the world. To get started, we're going to take a few minutes and show you a video highlighting the project.
The world is becoming increasingly focused on sustainability to protect our environment and way of life. Ever-growing emissions reduction commitments from governments, industry, and consumers require creative solutions. Summit Carbon Solutions is leading decarbonization by partnering with more than 30 ethanol facilities in the upper Midwest to capture, transport, and permanently store their CO2 emissions, cutting their carbon intensity in half, enabling them to produce a net zero carbon fuel by the end of the decade. Driven by growing markets for low carbon fuels, combined with additional incentives, this is a unique opportunity for biofuels and agriculture to drastically improve their sustainability and carbon footprint. The result is billions of gallons of low-carbon fuels produced by Summit Carbon Solutions ethanol plant partners, which are part of an industry responsible for consuming nearly 40% of the U.S. corn crop every year. Backed by Summit Agricultural Group, a firm with decades of experience in agriculture, renewable fuels, and project development. Summit Carbon Solutions is a truly revolutionary platform capable of capturing, transporting, and storing 12 million metric tons of CO2 per year, which will make it the largest carbon capture and storage project in the world. That's the equivalent of removing emissions from 2.6 million cars each year, or the same amount of carbon stored by 14.7 million acres of forest. Summit Carbon Solutions will construct an infrastructure network connecting industrial facilities to areas suitable for carbon storage. This infrastructure is critical to achieving growing emissions reduction targets. Experts predict that the carbon capture and storage capacity will have to grow by 100 times current levels by 2050 to reach critical emissions goals. The process and technology behind carbon capture and storage has been researched and refined for decades. Today, it's proven and reliable. CO2 is captured from industrial sources such as ethanol fertilizer or power plants. Compressed CO2 is transported through pipelines. CO2 arrives at the injection site in North Dakota and is injected approximately a mile below ground. Finally, CO2 is stored in highly researched geologic formations, where it will stay safely for millions of years. The net result is a substantial reduction in CO2 emissions that would have otherwise gone into the atmosphere. Our $4.5 billion investment across 5 states will create more than 15,000 jobs and have a substantial economic impact on Midwest communities. The carbon reduction opportunity does not end there. Summit Carbon Solutions is pursuing additional opportunities in its drive to become the world's premier carbon management company. The world is increasingly looking for sustainable solutions to lower its carbon footprint. Carbon capture and storage enables meaningful reductions in emissions, utilizing proven technology to improve our environment and make a lasting impact. Summit Carbon Solutions, a safer, cleaner future is in store.
Okay, thank you. And just to give you a little bit of an overview of the project, Summit Carbon Solutions was formed with the goal of developing the world's largest carbon capture and storage project. The project is located in 5 states across the Midwest: Iowa, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Nebraska. We've signed long-term agreements with 31 ethanol plants in these 5 states, including 12 here in Iowa. We will capture the carbon dioxide emissions at these facilities, compress it, and transfer it to North Dakota through a pipeline where it will be permanently stored deep underground. The project currently calls for about 2,000 miles of pipeline across those 5 states. Assuming we clear the regulatory requirements at the federal, state, and local levels, our hope is to begin construction in 2023 and have the project operational in 2024. Enhancing the long-term profitability of ethanol and agriculture is a major driver of this project. Summit Carbon Solutions enables ethanol to be produced more sustainably, allowing it to better compete in a growing low-carbon world. By enhancing the ethanol industry and ensuring an end market for corn, the project will benefit every Midwestern landowner. As many of you in this room know, 53% of Iowa's corn crop goes to ethanol plants, and over 44,000 jobs are tied to ethanol. The long-term viability of the ethanol industry is critical for agriculture, rural America, and Iowa. This project helps achieve that. Slide 6 shows our project location and partner facilities. The Midwest Carbon Express will be located in 5 states and will run through 29 Iowa counties. We have 31 ethanol plant partners across 20 companies in our footprint. 12 of those ethanol plants are here in Iowa, including Green Plains here in Dickinson County in Superior. Some nearby ethanol plants that we're partnering with are Little Sioux Corn Processors in Cherokee, Quad County Corn Processors in Ida, Siouxland Energy in Sioux County, and Plymouth Energy in Plymouth County. And here's the Iowa project map. As I mentioned, we do have a copy of this in the back of the room if you'd like to take that home. And slide 8 shows the Dickinson County project map. Again, we have a copy of this in the back of the room. There are significant economic benefits with this project. Summit Carbon Solutions will drive economic growth and job creation across the Midwest and beyond. Our project represents a $4.5 billion total investment. During construction, we will maintain 14,000 to 17,000 high-quality jobs. Once the project is completed, we anticipate having 350 to 460 permanent employees, both during the construction phase and once the project is operational. We will partner with a wide range of local businesses, and in doing so, provide a meaningful, ongoing boost to the economies and communities across the Midwest, particularly rural and smaller communities. Slide 10 talks about the environmental benefits of the project. The project is a critical component in helping reduce greenhouse gas emissions. If approved, the project will have the capacity to capture and permanently store 12 million tons of CO2 every year. This is the equivalent of removing 2.6 million cars from our roads annually. Today, we have long-term offtake agreements with 31 ethanol plants, including the 12 here in Iowa. This accounts for 9 million tons of the 12 million tons of annual capacity. We continue to have conversations with other partners and are optimistic about our ability to fill the remaining 3 tons of capacity. And now I'm going to hand it over to Jimmy.
Good afternoon again. So I'm going to walk through the construction and the easement acquisition and land reclamation restoration aspects of the project in a little more detail for you. So there are 3 primary components of the project. So at each of the 31 ethanol plants and the 12 in Iowa, so we'll install equipment that will pull the CO2 off of the fermentation process at a low pressure. We'll compress it to a higher pressure, and then we'll dehydrate it to pull all the water out so it'll be a pure form of CO2 when it's injected into the pipeline. Then we'll inject it into the pipeline, and that pipeline will range from 4-inch to 24-inch as it moves through Iowa, northwest Iowa, and goes into South Dakota, North Dakota. The pipeline gets larger. And you can see the laterals coming off of the trunk line, which begins in north central Iowa. Those laterals are smaller diameter as well. So the largest pipeline size in Iowa, I believe, is 16-inch on the northwest side. And then when it gets to the sequestration site in North Dakota, the site is near the sites, multiple sites are near Bismarck. And so this is a part of North Dakota where there is no oil and gas production at this time. So the geology in North Dakota is such that it's fit for one of the primary locations for sequestration, and the geology is such that subsurface there's porous rock, and near the surface there's impermeable cap rock, and so as the CO2 is injected downhole or subsurface, then it fills the voids in that porous rock. And over time, it solidifies, and because you have the cap rock on top, it never comes back to the surface. safety. As Board Member Burns mentioned, so this pipeline, even though CO2 isn't flammable or combustible, it still falls under a hazardous liquid characterization by the federal government. So it falls under PHMSA guidelines. So we're required to follow those guidelines in the design, construction, and operation. And so that's the same for any other liquid pipeline or natural gas pipeline that runs through the area or potentially even across your property. There's about 5,000 miles of CO2 pipeline that's been in service in the U.S. for decades. And you may be familiar with some of them, you may not. Most of it's in Colorado and in Texas, Wyoming. But it's really used largely for enhanced oil recovery. So they inject the CO2 downhole. It pushes or displaces the oil and allows them to bring more production back to the surface. And it depends on the geology of those areas. It may permeate back. Some of that CO2 may permeate back to the atmosphere. In North Dakota, in this area, it will not. And the CO2, as I said, the CO2 pipelines have been in service for quite some time. We're using no new technology. So the compression, dehydration equipment at the source facilities, it's in service today in various other process areas like gas plants, etc. And the pipeline is a carbon steel pipeline. The metallurgy will be similar as it would be for crude oil, refined products, or natural gas. And the sequestration equipment is similar. The wells that we inject into are similar to a well that they would use for production to bring the oil and gas back to the surface. As we said, PHMSA regulations dictate how we design, construct, and operate. But there are areas in the project where we'll exceed those expectations. So just a couple for reference. They require that we x-ray 10% of the girth well. So every time the well is made, then an examination has to be made of that well. The film is examined and they can tell you if it's a good well. And so we'll actually x-ray 100% of the wells versus 10%. Another requirement, and I would be concerned if I were a landowner, so the intent is always to keep carbon dioxide in the pipe. And one way to determine that is a line balance, which is what the PHMSA requires. So that means if we put 12 million tons into the pipeline, we get 12 million tons out of North Dakota, that's line balance. We go above and beyond that, so we'll do a computational type leak detection system. So at every point along the pipeline, we'll understand what the temperature, pressure, flow rate is. We'll have a control center in Ames, Iowa, that'll be manned 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. If we see any fluctuation outside of what we think is a normal operating condition, we have the ability to shut the pipeline in at that time until we evaluate and determine if we think there's a control or operational issue. So our commitment to you, I think as Jake mentioned, we're an Iowa-based company, we're an ag company. Our company has really two business segments. One is farming, pork, beef, production, etc. The other side is an investment part of the business. They've built ethanol plants, wind farms. They currently operate ethanol plants in Brazil. And so they conceptually came up with this idea to build this carbon dioxide pipeline. And so our parent company has been in Alden, Iowa since the 90s. And we have, as Jake mentioned, we're going to partner with at least, hopefully more, 12 ethanol plants in Iowa. So unlike some pipelines or utilities that come through the state of Iowa, they may originate outside of the state of Iowa and terminate somewhere else. You're not getting the benefit of that natural gas, crude oil, refined products, whatever it is. You know, Iowans will get the benefit of part of this project because we are partnered with 12 plants locally in the state of Iowa. But since we're going to be in Ames, we're going to be headquartered in Ames, our parent company's in Alden. So, you know, we're going to live with Iowans every day. And so we got to make sure that during not only the land acquisition phase, but construction and operation, that we do the right thing and we're transparent and we treat landowners properly. If not, obviously you've got easy access to us and we want to make sure that's always on friendly terms. So compensation for landowners. So as Board Member Burns mentioned, you're not selling your property to Summit Carbon, you're leasing us an easement. And what we're going to request is a voluntary easement 100 foot wide across the pipeline, or across your land, where the pipeline would traverse. 50 foot of that would be characterized as a permanent easement and 50 foot as a temporary easement. And what we mean, and that's all 100% reusable. So we install the pipeline, we come back and restore the land the way we found it. Then you can, if it's in agricultural use, you can replant 100% of that right away. The reason we ask for a 50-foot permanent easement is because if we ever have a problem, we have to perform maintenance on the pipeline, then we'll have a right to come in, obviously with proper notification to the landowner. We'll have a right to come in and perform that work in that 50-foot wide easement. The compensation will be based on fair market value. So these, I mean, Board Member Burns mentioned that we have 31 of these, and they'll conclude in mid-October. We'll establish a price at that time for the land value at that time, and we'll use the Iowa Land Sales Report or some other reputable source. And please, let us know if there's a source that you prefer. And we're going to choose something like that. It updates on a regular basis versus like the Iowa State Survey that updates annually, because again, we're an ag company, so we know that, and we buy and sell farmland, so we know that those prices are pretty dynamic now, and I think they're going up, not down. And so we want to make sure that we reflect what we think is the fair market value at that time. We'll offer you 100% of that value, so easy math, and I'm not going to vouch for my geography here, but if you got 80 acres and the easement, the 100-foot easement that I mentioned, if that traverses 5 acres of that for easy math and the value is $20,000, that's $100,000. So that's how we'll determine that value. You'll have as Jake mentioned, there'll be a land agent that's assigned to every single landowner. They're required to provide an overview of the project, overview of your rights, what we're seeking from you, and they're supposed to guide you along that whole process. If you don't feel that you're getting what you need from that individual, or you just want to talk to a Summit person, we will have a designated Summit Carbon employee that's available and accessible to landowners all day, every day. And so you can reach out to them anytime you want to, not only during the construction phase, but when we go into operation as well. On the next slide, you'll see that there's the Iowa state process, or the Iowa law says that after you agree, let's say you voluntarily agree to an easement, there is a process by which you can rescind that. So you have 7 days to say, I've thought about this some more, I'm not comfortable, I want to change my mind. That's within your right. It's a process that's dictated by the Iowa Utility Board or Iowa statute. You follow that and you can rescind the voluntary easement. So crop loss compensation, I'm sure this is an important one too. If you're farming your property or someone else is farming your property. So we're proposing that we provide 100% for the first year, 80% for the second year, 60% for the third year. So what that means is we're making an assumption that your yield may be affected after we finish construction. And so we're going to give you 240% to compensate for what any yield loss you have over that 3-year period up front. So again, using that same math, if it's 5 acres that we disturb and it's corn and it's 200 bushels an acre, so that's 1,000 bushels of corn if my math's right. And if it's $7 a bushel, hopefully it goes back up, then that's $7,000. And that's up front. Now, we want to start construction in early 23, but it's not, construction's not going to start on every aspect of the pipeline on day one. So if that falls into the fall, if it's before you plant it and then you plant and it doesn't affect your crop, we're still going to pay damages as if you had a crop in the field when we mobilize. If we're moving late into the fall and you've had a chance to harvest before we access the property, we're still going to pay you the damages even though you've harvested the crop for that period of time. I'll walk through the constructions. We're going to talk about drain tile. There's a pictorial on the back. Many of you may be familiar with utility construction, but I'll walk through it generally at a high level of the process. We do have a couple of individuals from Ellington today that are tile contractors and one of the largest drain tile contractors in the Midwest. We have a gentleman from U.S. Pipeline, Justin, that's over here on my right side of the room. U.S. Pipeline will be one of the contractors that we use on the project. Not sure if they're going to be in the state of Iowa, but they may be. And he can walk through in much better detail than I can about the construction if you have any questions or concerns about that process in detail. But generally, we're going to come in, again, let's say you've got a crop in the field, we'll come in, we'll remove the crop, we'll take that top layer of vegetation off, we'll remove your topsoil, we'll put it to one side of the right-of-way, we'll we'll take the subsoil, move it to the other side of the right of way, and again, that's why we want 100 foot wide, because when you've got a windrow of topsoil and subsoil, especially in some areas in Iowa where you may have more than 12 inches of topsoil, then we'll make sure we've got plenty of room to store that so we don't contaminate your topsoil. We'll come through, we'll trench, we'll come through, string the pipe, weld the pipe, test the pipe, confirm that it's safe, withstands a hydrostatic test, and then we'll put it in the ditch and we'll backfill. And then we'll come back and try to restore the property to the way we found it. During that process, if we damage drain tile, which again, we would like to get involved in front with the landowner. So if we have permission from the utility board to begin construction, but we haven't mobilized our contractor yet, and you said we approach you about potentially either relocating tile, putting in headers, anything that we can do that might either improve or at least minimize the damage we'll cause during construction, we'd like to talk about that. If we could get these guys in before we mobilize the contractor, it might minimize the downtime or the damage. If we can't do that, or you're not comfortable with that, then we'll have Ellingson or a contractor of your choice. So if you're comfortable working with a local contractor that typically works on your property, installs, repairs your drain tile, that's fine, works for us. We would want them to be involved, either Ellingson or them, right behind the construction spread. So when they come in, they can do either a temporary repair or the permanent repair there. If it's a temporary repair, they'll come back shortly thereafter and do the permanent repair. And at any time in the future, not just during these 3 years, but 4 years, 5 years, 6 years down the road, if you have an issue with your drain tile and it's due to the construction, then we'll fix it. If you've got crops in the field and we damage those crops to get in and do that repair, that's on us. We'll fix that. If any time during the life of the pipeline, if you have erosion or something that's due to the operation of the pipeline, we'll come in and we'll fix that. The last slide is the timeline. Jake mentioned that we want to start construction in 23 and be in service in mid-24. There's a lot of things on the front end that go into that. We have to get all of our regulatory permits, and not only with the utility board, but the other public utility commissions in the other 4 states. We have to get permits from the U.S. Corps of Engineers, federal permits from U.S. Fish and Wildlife, state and local, county use permits, road use permits. So there's a lot of regulatory hurdles that we have to clear to be able to construct. We hope to have all those in hand by the end of next year, end of 22, and be able again to construct in 23. And we're trying to compress that window of construction to 12 to 15 months, so it's the least amount of disruption to the property owner. It's a lot of pipeline, so it's going to take some time to construct, but we're going to mobilize multiple contractors, very high caliber contractors like U.S. Pipeline, Minnesota Limited, and others that are some of the top contractors in the Midwest, and we'll deploy them multiple spreads so we can hopefully get this done in a fairly short window. Turn it back over to you, Board Member Burns.
All right, so Bob, I think the only thing we need to be clarified on my checklist would be the timing of the easement payments. When are those payments made?
I can't get that one right. If you remind me of that one a couple times, I apologize. So the payment would be as soon as you agree to give us a voluntary easement, negotiate that payment, then we would clear title, and then within a short period of time, so we would pay you as quickly as possible. I don't know if that's going to take 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever that is. We'll pay you as quickly as possible as soon as we get the title work with you.
And it's technically right after the 7-day cancellation.
Oh, so true.
Thank you. All right, we are at that part of the presentation where we will take questions now at this point in time. Again, we have a microphone that is set up right here in the middle. I would ask that all questions come through a microphone. Again, I want everybody to hear what is being asked, and that way you all hear the responses that come as a result of that. As a representative of the Iowa Utilities Board, I will take questions on the permit process and the utility board proceedings, and Summit Carbon representatives will take questions on the project itself. And again, if you have any sort of difficulties getting to this main microphone, we can accommodate and get a microphone to you. So with that, we would welcome the first questions of the day.
My name is Larry Tuttle. I've got a question. What is the operating temperature of that pipeline?
So it's, when it leaves the source plants, it'll leave at about 80 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And as soon as it gets below ground, it typically very quickly stabilizes to ground temperature. So when it's traversing your property, 60 degree Fahrenheit range, so it won't heat or cool the ground.
How deep is that?
Good question. Sorry, I was negligent in mentioning that. So the minimum top of pipe will be 48 inches, 4 feet. But again, with respect to drain tile or any other water lines or anything that might be on your property, if we need to go deeper, then we'll do that. The minimum depth will be 48 inches. And even if you're planning to put drain tile in the future or change the elevation of your drain tile, you let us know. We'll make sure that we put the pipe in to a depth that will accommodate that.
Okay. Is there any, you're sampling the data along that pipeline to see what your temperatures are and your pressures. Now, how is that communicated down to Ames by electronic lines or over the internet, or how are you doing this?
Yeah,
I'm concerned about the safety of it. If something would happen, somebody interfere with, with lines, you hear this all the time, where these companies are shut down and everything else. How would that affect you and the pressures on those pipelines?
So our own pipeline?
Yes.
Yeah, so we'll have, so they'll be hardwired, and then everything will be sent back to Ames via satellite, communicated back to Ames via satellite. So they'll have computer monitors, and they'll have the system of the pipeline on those monitors, for the pipeline itself, also for the capture facilities and sequestration. But they'll see what valves are open and closed, what pumps are on and off. They'll see what the flow rate is, what temperatures are along the line, and more importantly, pressures. So if they see a pressure variation, because of ground temperature and stuff, you'll see some slight pressure variations. But if you see one outside the normal operating boundary, then they have the ability to shut in the system immediately.
There's a series of valves then that you can shut it down, so.
Yes, sir. So we'll have to do a risk assessment. It's good practice, but PHMSA requires it. The Iowa Utility Board will require it. So we'll do a risk assessment, and what that means is we'll model it, and we'll see if someone doesn't call 811 and they're digging around the pipeline without permission and they strike it and they damage it and there's a release, then we'll model to see where that is. So we don't, even though it's CO2, it's not flammable, it's not combustible, it is an asphyxiant. So we want to make sure that, if there's a low area or depression, then, we've got valves closer that we can shut to minimize how much CO2 could actually be released. And so we'll use that to space the valves and automate the valves and determine closure time. So typically we try to get a valve closed within 30 seconds.
Oh, okay.
And then we'll partner with not only local responders. I mean, your fire department should be familiar with CO2, but not necessarily in the pipeline. Police departments, etc. We'll work with them to make sure that they, one, are familiar with it or trained on it, and then secondly, have the resources to respond. And I realize that in rural areas, some fire departments may be voluntary, may not have all the equipment that a Des Moines would have, fire department may have, maybe they do. But if they don't, we also partner with what we call OSROs, and these are just companies that have regional offices, and they have a lot of equipment. So whether it's boats, boom, fire equipment, even though it's not flammable combustible, but spill response equipment, even though it won't be on the ground, they have all the equipment we would need for an emergency, and we'll partner with them so that somebody can respond quickly.
There's no permanent contamination if you have a leak, is there?
It's CO2, so it's what's in the atmosphere all the time.
Now, if you go through with this now, where do you plan on starting first? Different areas and meet up, or how are you going to do that?
That's a good question. So it's going to be a longer process because we've got 31 plants. We've got to start those up. That instrumentation I talked about along the pipeline, we've got every single one of those locations. We've got to make sure it's communicating properly. And so it'll be a several month process to start it all up, but we want to have everything operational by in the second quarter of 24.
Okay, how soon would they start marking that route?
Well,
if you give them permission,
If you give us permission now to survey, then we want to come in, and again, that's not binding you to anything other than we would tell you, here's where the pipeline will cross your property, and here are the boundary surveys of that corridor and that 100-foot easement. And then if you say, I if you were agreeable to bring it across your property or let it traverse your property, but you don't want it where we have it routed, but you're okay with it moving it toward the boundary or some other location of your property, we're open for that too. But the survey, we want to get in and survey just as quickly as we can after harvest, because not only do we have to do that land survey, we've got to do biological and cultural surveys. So again, we're required to survey a percentage of the pipeline. We're going to do 100. So we've got to come in and determine if there's wetlands, endangered species, cultural artifacts. We want to do that, along the entire route. And so the sooner we can get in the survey, the sooner we can begin that activity.
You'll let us know then what size it's going to at that time, or, the size of the pipeline when you go through.
We know what we think the size is now. So as Jake mentioned, the 31 plants is about 9 million tons. We're designing it for 12 million tons for capacity. Because when we come back through, right now there's 6 pump stations along the full pipeline route. 2 of those are in Iowa, if I remember correctly. But we can add pump stations or horsepower, because we don't want to come back and disturb your property to add something. We want to put it in one time. So we're designing with a little excess capacity. So then if we let's say we were fortunate and we got 14 million tons, we can potentially add pump stations and don't have to adjust the pipeline size.
Thank you.
You're welcome. While this gentleman's walking up to, I want to correct him. I misspoke earlier because my pipeline construction contractor will flag me. I think I mentioned a hydrostatic test it. When the pipe's on, they will x-ray it and make sure that the welds are sound. We won't hydrostatically test it till all the pipes in the ditch and buried. So sorry about that. He'll correct me.
I'm Conroy Johnson here in Dickinson County. I'm a property owner. I have shares in an ethanol plant. I pay property tax. I pay state tax. I pay federal tax. Who's going to pay for this project? Is it coming out of my pocket?
Sure. So great question. So the $4.5 billion to construct the pipeline is a mixture of investments and loans. And then once the project is operational in 2024, we then have 2 major revenue streams. The first revenue stream is the ethanol plant focus. So the ethanol plants that partner with us, as I mentioned, the one here in Dickinson County, they will have a reduction in their carbon intensity score by 30 points. And by doing so, they'll then be able to sell that ethanol to low carbon fuel markets. Those markets include California, Oregon, Washington, parts of Canada, and that's expanding as time goes forward. So they'll be able to sell that ethanol at a premium, and then the ethanol plant and Summit Carbon split that, what they call the uplift there. The second revenue stream is what they call the 45Q tax credit. That's currently at $50 per ton. That was done during the Trump tax cuts back in 2017 and 18, and it's largely been a bipartisan supported tax credit. That's roughly about 20% of the revenue of the company. Does that answer your question? Oh, and then additionally, we will pay property taxes as well. I don't have the exact figures for each county yet, but we will be doing a full economic analysis.
So it's all investments that's going to do this. Is that, I get it right?
Yeah, we receive no good government money up front. This is all investment. But when we go into operation, there is a tax credit that may represent 20% or so of the income.
So if we go with our current administration, say they're going to electric down the road in 10, 15 years, what's that going to do to the industrial?
Well, and that's really the main point. One of the main drivers of this project is about positioning ethanol for the future. So currently, roughly 2% of vehicles sold are electric. So we have to, as I say, the state of Iowa, the Midwest, the rural economy, has to find a way to position ethanol to be viable in the future. And so by positioning itself, by partnering with us, this positions ethanol to be a low carbon fuel. And so if anything, the low carbon fuel market is growing, not subtracting. So, Jeff?
Yeah, and I would just add too, I think Jake hit the nail on the head. I mean, part of what we do is look at the landscape of where we think the marketplace is moving. As Jake mentioned, 2% of vehicles today that are purchased in the United States are electric vehicles. We still believe very strongly that consumers are going to continue to choose internal combustion engines. There's still going to be a marketplace for it. And based on that, we want to make sure that ethanol is well positioned to be able to be successful in the future. Now, when we access these low carbon fuel standard markets, the lower our carbon intensity score, we were able to access these markets and sell our product at a premium. So it does represent a significant opportunity for the ethanol plants. I should also mention there are two that are just north of here in Minnesota, in Jackson County, Martin County as well. Other part of our network, part of the 31 ethanol plants. So as we look at the marketplace, we still believe there's going to be strong demand for internal combustion engines. We also believe there's going to be expanded markets that choose to adopt low carbon fuel standards as well.
So I take it that I should get more income from my ethanol shares down the road, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We'll support that, sir.
Are your easements have a clause in them? If your company would go belly up, that the contractors that are out there working, labor people that are out there working, would file a lien against the property that they are now on?
Well, we have a negotiated easement, and as a landowner, you have control, obviously, on what verbiage is in the easement, but we don't have any intention of going bankrupt during construction or thereafter.
But it happens, doesn't it?
I don't know, sir, that hasn't happened in my experience.
I'll tell you what, I think I speak for a few people here. This thing's got some red flags on it. I mean, this is the biggest pipeline system to capture CO2, and it's the only one. It's the only one.
No, just one thing on that. There's 5,000 miles of carbon pipeline in the ground today. There's carbon sequestration currently happening in Illinois, North Dakota. The difference between this project and the projects that are active today is just the pipeline network to connect all the ethanol plants together. So for instance, ADM has a plant in DeKalb, I believe it is, that's currently doing this today. There's active sequestration lines in North Dakota. So Iowa does not have the geological footprint to sequester the carbon in Iowa. And that's why we have to transport it to North Dakota for that to work. And I would just add too, I don't know if your first question was regarding, there is state law that dictates the determination of the life of a pipeline. So we would have to follow the state law if that ever did occur many decades from now.
I would just say, sir, that like I mentioned earlier, we've got another year plus before we actually begin construction. And so there's a lot of activity that has to take place then. So at that point, we'll have a lot more certainty about the viability of the project. One of the key elements of that is that the Iowa Utility Board grants us a permit. But secondly, we'll have full funding for the project at that time, or we wouldn't begin construction. We don't have any concern that we won't be able to fund the project.
Well, you'll put that in paper and sign that then, right? You know?
Again, you have the control over that.
Well, you've heard about the tail trying to wag the dog. You know, I'm saying, I mean, let's get all the cards on the table here. How much investment does each ethanol plant have to make to capture this?
They don't have to make any investment. So our project, I mean, there was more than one project being proposed. I think we're more advanced or mature in our process, but we're not asking the ethanol plant to put up any capital. We are. We're putting up all the capital. And that's the reason that they're willing to share their uplift with, if they receive one for the low carbon fuel market, because it's no risk to them other than we put in a kit beside their plant that we don't put in operation, but we wouldn't put it in if we didn't think we'd put it in operation.
It's just so they do have the ability to invest in the project, though. But we don't ask them for any cost.
Did I hear you say there's no federal money on this?
Not until operation.
Now, so we're not getting any federal loans, but there is a tax credit that after we go into operation for every ton of CO2 that we permanently inject below surface in North Dakota, there's a $50 tax credit associated with that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Bill Moss. I don't have a duck in the puddle or a horse in the race or anything on this, but I am the current chair of the Dickinson County Emergency Management Committee. And so what I would like, I haven't heard any operating pressures or anything, and I'm sure that my committee would have a concern over what happens. You know, let's say that Jim has a pipeline running by the back of his house someplace. He looks out the back door, the pipeline is ruptured. I'd like to know what the scenario is going to look like from the pipeline rupturing to the time that everything is back in place where it should be. That's one of the questions I have.
Sure, well, I hope we're not running right behind Jim's back door. We want to stay at least 500 feet away from Jim's back door, and won't be as far away as he'll allow us to get on his, if he allows us on his property. But we're going to discharge at 2,100 pounds out of the source plant, so it is high pressure. I mean, it's a little higher pressure than probably the normal gas pipeline, and the utility may be running through your property, if there is one. We'll always keep it above 1,300 pounds because we want to keep it in that dense or liquid phase. If we have a rupture, which is, you know, our intent is to always keep the CO2 in the pipe, but if somebody strikes the pipeline and we have a release, then the pressure, you're right, will obviously disrupt the ground. It depends on how big a breach that is. If somebody nicks the pipe and it's a small hole, that obviously be smaller than if they really hit it and can cause a bigger breach. But it's an asphyxiant, so if someone, heaven forbid, were standing right over that area when that happened, then that obviously could be hazardous. But it will quickly dissipate. When it reaches atmosphere, the pressure dissipates, and then it's CO2, so it's a higher concentration of CO2 than is normally in the air, which is very low concentration, but it is CO2 and it's not combustible or flammable. So if you're on a tractor and you're 100 feet away, you know, depending on the size of the breach, that could still be dangerous, but that ignition source isn't going to cause an explosion.
And I would just add too, in the 20 years of carbon pipelines being operational in the United States, there's never been a fatality.
Well, the Titanic never sunk. I understand what you're saying. I'm not trying to be smart.
But sir, obviously we'll have an emergency preparedness plan, emergency response plan, and we'd love to network that with all, anybody that's affected, anybody that's emergency management along the route of the pipeline.
Okay. Well, with the gray hair, you can say I've been around the block a few times.
Yeah, me too.
And, but anyway, one of the statements you made, and it's an excellent marketing statement, you said about helping small towns and being the mayor of a small town, Orleans, Iowa, which the pipeline doesn't even come close to, I don't think.
It comes pretty close to Ames.
Well, Orleans starts about a half mile north here. So, yeah, we're the town that has the Lake Spirit Lake that the town Spirit Lake doesn't have.
I see.
But that's our marketing ploy there. But you said something about having this in and be an economic boon for people and different things. I understand that, but if it's like any other pipelines, you have a lot of economic influx into the communities while it's going on, and then all of a sudden the honeymoon's over. And so how does this help Orleans, Iowa, let's say, in the future after the dust settles and everybody goes back to their regular jobs?
Other than the indirect help, which if there's ethanol plants in the area, hopefully extending the life of those ethanol plants. If they make more money because their carbon intensity score goes down, maybe they'll spend that money and expand, which means that that'd be a higher demand for corn in the area. But we will have probably 350 to 400 employees across the whole 5 states. So, there's 30% of the pipeline is in Iowa, so quite a few of those will be in Iowa. I don't know if one will be in your town or not, but they'll be in the area. So that's not a huge contribution, other than property taxes, but we'll have local employees.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your candid answers and things, and if we can keep Conroy happy and he can get more money for different things, and probably everybody else we have to do. Thank you.
And I would say the contractors that Jimmy's team will hire, they try to hire 50% local. So they bring in folks from their teams, but they also try to hire at least 50% local too. So I know there's some good folks here with orange shirts on. They they're part of that crew that gets hired.
Hi, I'm Dale Kimball. The pipeline would cross our property. I guess my question is for Mr. Burns. Where is it determined that CO2 is a hazardous material?
So that's a great question. We had that asked from us, I believe it was last evening as well. So I understand where you're coming from, because in the presentation we talk about hazardous liquid pipeline. They tell you about how it dissipates in the atmosphere, so it does get confusing. So the designation for this comes from, when you heard me talk about PHMSA earlier, and so CO2, when it goes through a pipeline based on those federal standards, is actually considered or falls underneath the umbrella of a hazardous liquid. And so that's where the designation comes from.
Well, is it a pretty well established, I mean, we hear all the time in the news that carbon is going to destroy the earth or whatever, you know, and there's a lot of scientists that deny that there is such a thing as global warming. And I think there's been a lot of people bamboozled. I don't know if you're familiar, have you ever heard of a man named John Casey?
I have.
He used to be involved with the federal government. He's a climate scientist. He says the whole thing is a myth, that it's $22 billion a year our government spends in this big farce. And I really think it's up to you guys to determine if this thing is even necessary to start with. And then another question is, from you folks, are you going across any Department of Natural Resources property?
Yeah, well, we try to avoid any easements that are high consequence, high risk, or where we wouldn't be able to cross, for instance. So, I mean, bird migratory areas. When we're trying to route the pipeline, I know, some of you may be as well versed in it as I am, but for those of you who aren't, there's a plethora of things that we have to consider, and so we try to keep it in the utility corridors, because that seems to be, the areas it's not only maybe more palatable for a landowner, but from just a pure routing perspective, is the most likely that we could achieve. So with time we avoid high consequence areas, we avoid wetlands, we avoid endangered species areas, we avoid DOT corridors, federal grasslands. I mean, there's a list that's 200, 300 characters long. We try to stay a certain distance from any structures, whether it's inhabited or not. That, believe it or not, across the United States, even the Midwest, that doesn't leave a very wide swath to route a pipeline. So we're doing our best to try to balance all those. That's a long-winded answer to your question, but
well, I can tell you won't get across any DNR land. It's not possible.
You're correct.
That's sacred.
You're absolutely correct. I'm glad you said that. I didn't have to.
Yeah, and sir, on your first question, I think we recognize that there are different opinions when it comes to the environmental benefits. There are clearly environmental benefits that are associated with our project. I would say the reason why this project exists and we're moving it forward is through a combination of reasons. I would say first and foremost, it really is about what Jake and Jimmy described about support for the ethanol industry, and also as part of that, with 53% of corn that's produced being purchased by ethanol, to make sure that that consumer stays strong. So if you're growing corn, you have a strong consumer who can purchase that, and the ethanol and the 360,000 jobs that it supports across the country are able to remain strong and hopefully grow that industry in the years to come.
My question is for the Attorney Generals. My property is already under lease to a windmill company. So I would just assume, I can't give them another lease, correct? Until they negotiate with the windmill company.
Well, I think probably your question is best going to Summit, but the process for negotiating the easement, and if you have a property right that they can acquire, would be something they would determine through
I
the
mean, I just assumed they
negotiations.
didn't count on the trail they want to take.
Right.
There's gonna be a windmill there. They
Right,
need to visit with the windmill
right,
company.
right.
Okay, before I give them an easement. And the simplest question that nobody's asked, what are the ethanol plants doing now with the CO2 emissions?
Just goes in there.
Can I also just say, so on your question, it is emitted to the atmosphere today. I do think it's important to kind of talk about where ethanol's been and also where it is today and where it's going. So when the industry first got started in the 1990s, the carbon intensity scores, looking at the carbon intensity of ethanol production versus fuel production, traditional fuel production, was about 99, so it's pretty much on par. As of 2020, that was down to 54. So through technology, innovation, efficiencies in the supply chain, that carbon intensity score has come down. This project would put the ethanol that's produced at these facilities and our partner facilities on track to be a net zero fuel source by the end of the decade. So that carbon intensity score is coming down through our project, through additional innovations, additional efficiencies. And again, that really opens up additional economic opportunities for states that currently have low carbon fuel standard markets and states that will in the future, in the years to come.
Sir, if I can just real quick, so it depends on what the restrictions that the wind turbine company has in place. I mean, we can coexist. There's some different, the additional design considerations we have to take if we're going to be in close proximity to high voltage. We can coexist. It just depends.
I just didn't want you to, 10 days after this meeting, come out and go through my cornfield, and I don't want you to do that because I already have my land is already under easement. That would be illegal.
Yeah, we'll have to definitely understand what the restrictions are for those folks. You're right.
So will there be a lien on the property when you go through? Like a
Illegal-
windmill farm?
Not that I'm aware of, sir. I mean, again, we don't transfer ownership. The only thing we want to do is an easement to allow us to cross under the property. I may not be the right person to answer that question. I'm not aware of that.
Somebody ought to know.
Well, our land agents would, they would have more information.
You know, you can't go through a DNR ground, but by God, you can go through ours. We worked hard to own it. And as far as in North Dakota, you're gonna put that about a mile in the ground,
Yes, sir, at least.
and it's gonna eventually work its way up.
No, it can't because of there's been exhaustive studies from North Dakota State, the Department of Energy and Environmental Resource Center, their partner with North Dakota State, exhaustive studies on where it's geologically preferable, and that's in this area in North Dakota. There's 250 billion tons of capacity in North Dakota, and they welcome the sequestration of the. If they thought they was going to permeate back to the surface, they wouldn't authorize or give us a permit to store it there.
Now, you said the ground is coarse, whatever.
It's porous.
Fill that up. Well, it's gonna do that. Anything that's thrown above there will die, because that heats it out.
Well, again, the cap rock is such that it's impermeable, so it can't permeate back to the surface. And there's currently sequestration happening now, and then as part of our permit application process, we have to drill test wells. We have to prove that those wells are adequate for not only injecting, and then we'll see what happens with the CO2. Thank you.
My name is Sarah Kelly. I'm a landowner, farmer, and the operator. And I'd like to address the conflict of interest. And I don't want to be disrespectful, I'd like to turn my backs and address these people that hasn't been brought up today. There is a conflict of interest with the Iowa Utilities Board and Carbon Company. It was not addressed here today. Terry Branstad while in office as governor, he appointed 2 of the 3 appointed and certainly currently the Iowa Utilities Board. Jerry Huser, Chair, Richard Lozier, Member. Now in March, Summit Carbon Solutions hired Terry Branstad as their senior policy advisor on the project of the CO2 pipeline. He landed the job, no doubt, with his connection and his ally, political partner, Bruce Rastetter, CEO and founder of the parent company to Carbon Solutions, named Summit Agriculture Group. Rastetter was appointed by former Governor Branstad to the Iowa Board of Regents of 2011, which he served as president. Rumblings across Iowa are asking for Terry Branstad to step down, and the 2 board members recuse themselves from any decisions on this pipeline. Now, the Iowa Utilities Board sent an email to the Des Moines Register saying that they will decide whether there is a possible conflict and at the appropriate time. And my question is, when is that appropriate time?
Absolutely glad to answer that question. I don't speak for the other 2 board members, and so I am just 1/3 of that board, and I will not speak on their behalf as to what they're going to do. I don't expect them to speak on my behalf of whatever I would do. We are a quasi-judicial board, and so the Iowa Utilities Board operates under the judicial ethics, and so they will have to make those decisions, but that's up to them. And I'm not here today to speak on their behalf.
Yeah, and I think for some perspective, and thank you for the question. Part of this project, as we look at it, there's a direct connection to ethanol, there's a direct connection to agriculture, there's a direct connection to energy, and also infrastructure. And, we believe that, former Governor Branstad, who left office in 2017, has a pretty unique perspective on all those issues. He's been involved in those issues for more than 40 years. So we appreciate the guidance that he has as a senior policy advisor. There are rigorous ethical guidelines, legal guidelines, and we have followed and will continue to follow all of those. And as far as I know, nothing improper has been suggested about this project.
Okay, because it's the eminent domain. It really lies in the hands of everybody that's all connected here today.
And this question is really easy. You guys believe that carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere actually affects climate change? Well, $1.5 billion, you ought to have an answer on that one.
So I will say that we are a bipartisan team. There's people here who are on different sides of the political aisle. I think that, again, there are varying, points of view in this room, and there's varying points of view, within Summit Carbon Solutions. I would say that there are significant, and this is the reason why I think the project exists, not for one reason, but for multiple reasons. There's significant economic opportunities, not just for Iowa communities, but also for a company like Summit Carbon Solutions and also the ethanol plant partners we have. The opportunity to access these low carbon fuel standard markets is an opportunity to put them on much more solid economic footing in the years to come, and support the jobs and also create new jobs within the industry. 17,000 jobs in construction, up to 460 jobs, permanent jobs once it's operational. So the economic side of this is significant. Support for the ethanol and agricultural industry is significant. And again, we look at the landscape. There has been policy set at the state level, at the federal level. Some of those you can support, some of those you cannot support. But emissions reductions goals are clearly part of the public conversation. And we believe that there's going to be additional move to try to reduce emissions between now and 2050. And this project, is uniquely positioned to be able to take advantage of those in terms of pursuing those economic opportunities. But again, primarily speaking, this is a way for us to bolster the ethanol industry after, let's be honest, a couple of challenging years with COVID and fewer people driving, with small refinery waivers. This is a significant economic opportunity for the facilities that partner within our network.
So that's kind of a no. It's a business. This is strictly about money then.
Well, I can give you my personal opinion about it.
Well, I kind of like that too.
What's that?
I would like that personal opinion as well.
Yes, I believe we should do more to reduce emissions.
Thank you.
One addition, I still haven't wrapped my arms around the income and expenses. All I hear is $4.5 billion, is that correct figure? And you get a 20% tax credit. How are you gonna, where's the income come from if the ethanol plants are not paying you any money?
So, and again, don't hold me to this math, but if the ethanol is going to a low carbon fuel market, let's say it gets a 50 cents markup, 50 cent premium. So you take the operating expense, if they're railing it from, north central Iowa to the west coast, and say that's 15 cents, so that leaves 35 cents, so we split it. So we get 17.5 cents, and they get 17.5 cents. Yes, sir. Because by us pulling the CO2 off of the process, that reduces their carbon intensity. You got it.
I missed that somewhere along the way.
So that's how we generate most of our revenue. And you're right, to operate this pipeline system is going to be hundreds of millions of dollars a year. So we've got to have an additional source of income to help offset that. You're right.
I'll give you a couple easy questions. Your setback rules on the pipeline for digging any foundations and that sort of thing once the pipeline's officially installed. I realize it's a 50-foot permanent easement, but how far, or are there restrictions on how close we can dig for permanent structures?
We'll work with you. We would rather you not put a permanent structure right over the pipeline physically. You can offset it. We like to maintain if somebody's going to dig around the pipeline, we like to make sure they don't dig within 2 foot of the pipeline. If you've got machinery and you want to dig outside of that, just let us know, because we'd like to be there and make sure we mark the pipeline and make sure we mark the edges of the pipeline, and we're there if we need to be to support whoever's doing the digging to make sure they don't damage the pipeline.
So you're saying you can be even up to 2 feet away and still have a workable arrangement to build structures?
Yeah, yes, I would rather you be comfortably 10 feet or more away. We can have that conversation. Depends on the structure, right? If it's and especially if it's something that's inhabited, we want a little farther away. But if it's a storage building or something like that, we'll work with you. If it's a fence, we'll work with you.
Sure. What about weight of vehicles and such going over that pipeline? What restrictions do us as landowners on the surface rights have against heavy machinery, trucks, et cetera, crossing that pipeline?
No, that's a good question. So we'll design it so it can withstand the weight of whatever the heaviest vehicle is. If that's a semi-trailer loaded full of corn or something like that, if it's a big farm, tractor or combine, we're designing to make sure they can withstand, because you can imagine the construction, there's going to be some heavy equipment as well. So we'll make sure that you can traverse that pipeline. Just let us know if you've got something that's really abnormal. Let us know, and we'll make sure we take that into consideration. But there should be no restrictions on the landowner, what you can cross the pipeline with.
So there's no restrictions then, generally speaking, on your limitation on weights for how you build all the pipeline, not that you can't make it better. What's that limit as your standard weight limit over that pipe?
So we typically figure out where it is. So if it's under a roadway or something and it's got a lot of traffic, heavy traffic, we take that in consideration. And there's PHMSA requires us to design for whatever the traffic may be or whatever the load may be, both the dead load, so something's just sitting on it, or a live load, something that's traversing it. So we just try to consider what would be the heaviest equipment or vehicle that may cross it, and then we add a safety factor.
And what about just an open field? It's rope wrapped, nothing special.
Same thing. We would just determine what's going to be the heaviest piece of equipment that may ever traverse that.
Okay, and then...
And that's one reason, that's one reason we put it 4 feet deep too, because depth of the pipeline, that helps. Not only because we want to get it, the requirement's 36 inches deep. We know there's a lot of drain tiles, we're trying to put it deeper. We know that there's agricultural use, so we put it deeper, but that also helps with the load as well.
Are there any above ground apertures for this pipeline for maintenance? Variegated out, because I don't see on the maps that they're indicating where those plan above ground. So certainly above ground is going to be more valuable use of my property than something below ground. I don't see the maps conveying any of that information.
You're correct, because we're going through the analysis I talked about earlier about if we had a release, where those valves would be located. So we'll have that very soon. And then if it is a valve located on your property, we try to always locate those close to a roadway or close to the edge of the property. So if some of the people have to access it, it's less intrusive to the landowner. We'll let you know anytime we want to come out, whether it's a valve or anything else, and check it. So we try to keep whatever above ground appurtenances on your property to a minimum and to the edge of the property. We'll know that in the next month or so, exactly.
And in any of the process of easements or eminent domain, are you including a most favorable nation clause so that all of the farmers and landowners can be treated equally?
We haven't considered a most favored nation, is that what you said? But we do have a mandate from Summit Ag that we treat everybody the same way. So that's why when we identify or post what we think is fair market value, that will be the same value for everyone. Now, it's a negotiation for you as a landowner. Obviously, you can accept or decline that, but I'll make the same initial offer to everyone.
For that county?
Yeah.
Each.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris Orrick, Spirit Lake Fire Department. I wanted to kind of address what she had said. One question though, you guys would be a member of the Iowa Pipeline Association if this goes through? Iowa Pipeline Association is who does all the training for the pipelines within the state of Iowa?
Yeah, we would prefer to be.
So, okay, and then to address kind of her question about putting a building that close, our tools specifically say that in a leak from something like that, we're looking at 100 meters where we would have to evacuate. And you may want to look up what the effects of carbon dioxide are when you just say, well, it's an asphyxiant. So at lower concentrations, it causes issues. Not saying that it's a, you know, we all live around hazmat all the time, right? But to gloss over it, low concentration causes confusion, hearing loss, vision loss. High concentrations, you have just a few minutes. So if you're putting a building within that zone, that would be an issue.
That's good. No, good clarification. That's why I said we want to know what the structure is, and I mentioned that, you know, we prefer not to have an inhabited structure. So if you're going to put a storage building or something, you know, we're open to that conversation.
Okay, so I got a field here, and this pipeline runs directly through it, corner to corner. And if you guys are building it during a time where I can get to one side of it to farm or put crop in the ground, would I be compensated for that?
Yes.
For ground I couldn't farm, okay. That's just a lot of ground there.
And again, it's like it may traverse diagonally across your property. If there's an opportunity and you prefer to move it, where it's traversing your property now, just let us know, talk to these folks in the back and say, hey, I may be willing to work with you guys, but work with me.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
This has to do with Landowner Insurance. I was on the Iowa State University wind turbine panel and know of several farmers that got sued because an employee was hurt on the construction part of it, or to do with turbines after they were functional. The farmers lost their ground. They did not realize at the time that they had to carry extra insurance. So is there any thought pattern on that?
So you mean the individual that got hurt sued the farmer?
Yep.
Or
Sued the
landowner, I'm
wind
sorry,
turbine
sued the
company and the farmer. The farmer lost, and of course the wind turbine company lost, but the farmer lost his farm because they got a judgment against him. And I know that for a fact because I was on a panel.
That's the first time I've heard that question. Brent, do you by chance know anything on that? Yeah, so we'd be happy to take your email and find out what that would be. I don't have it off the top of my head. I haven't heard that. Again, there's a big difference between our project and a wind turbine that's obviously above ground. They're taking permanent structure, permanent roads. We're all underground, the vast majority, so it's a lot different, but that's a great question. We'll get back to you on it.
You said during construction, which is a little different, so.
You know, some of this happened during construction. There were several incidents, and some of it was afterwards. Of course, yours is below ground, but the wind turbine, there was ice on it. Ice flew off, hit a lady's windshield, killed her. That was one incident. So now your pipeline blows up, somebody gets killed, the farmer's going to get sued, or if somebody was by the pipeline. So I presume it has the same effect. So anyway, just a thought.
Thank you.
Could you explain, like, you say it has 2,100 pounds of pressure per square inch. So then, like, if it explodes or something, then what would happen? I mean, do you have any idea on what it would actually look like?
Well, we have to model that as close as you can get to what may actually occur. Again, it's not flammable or combustible, but it is under high pressure. So,
but yeah, it's pressure.
So yeah, it's obviously going to disturb the surface, because it's going to make its way to the surface.
How far would it reach? Any thoughts?
I can't speculate, sir. We do have to model that, though. I can't speculate. Thank you.
I'm just a nobody. We just have an acreage of 50 acres in Karen Creek's Camp, Terrell, north of Terrell. And our house is very close to the highway. And I wonder, are you going to be putting this pipeline through the ditch or through our yard? If you go too far in, it'll be going right through our house. And I wondered about that.
Well, ma'am, we definitely don't want to come close to your house. We probably, and again, we'd have to look at where your property is and where the pipeline route is, and these folks have the maps to show you that. But we're not going to be laying along the edge of the pipeline either, because of boundary restrictions from whether state, county, etc. So hopefully we won't be coming through your front yard, but they can tell you where it is, because we try to maintain at least a 500-foot setback from any residence. So we may not even be traversing your property unless you know that for sure.
So you would be flexible in changing your route?
Oh, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
What about the trees that are very close to our yard?
Well, again, we obviously in 2,000 miles of pipeline, there's going to be areas where we have to remove trees. We prefer not to. So we just again have to look and see where the pipeline route is with respect to your property. And yes, we'll try to work with you.
I hope you do. Also, when Green Plains went up, we were told that there would be no pollution issues with Green Plains. Why now all this talk of pollution from Green Plains?
Well, I can't speak to their emissions plan. I mean, my assumption is that their emissions are regulated by the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, and they're in compliance with those emissions levels. Part of this is, as I mentioned before, the carbon intensity score of the product they produce, and ethanol production has significantly reduced his carbon emissions, his carbon intensity score over the course of the last 30 years, almost by half. And this project will put it on track to be a net zero fuel source by the end of the decade. So from where we've been to where we are today, it's been significant progress. and this would accelerate that progress over the next 10 years.
We're in effect giving you guys permission to be on our property to put this pipeline in. Who's responsible, who's liable if some, even an employee or even a hunter or anybody else who's on that property gets injured? Where's the liability at?
You mean during construction or what?
Well, that and afterwards.
Well, so we're 4 feet underground, you know, I mean.
If it blows out, somebody's there, you know.
Yeah, I mean, our company would hold significant insurance and all that. I can't, we do have an attorney in the room that I'd be happy to get you with after the.
Is that stated in their lease agreements when you come in? That that they assume the full liability for anything they cause or do?
Again, I think we'll need to consult the attorney, and we can get back to you.
I'm very concerned about that. Now, that could very well happen.
Sure. I mean, there are, I would guess, several hundred miles of, there's pipeline all over this county, all over the state. I mean, it's not a new thing. I would just want to get you the correct answer on that. We'll do that after the meeting with our attorney in the back of the room, but it's, like I mentioned, there's 5,000 miles of carbon pipeline, there's oil pipeline, natural gas pipelines. That issue's been addressed. I just don't have the correct answer right now.
Okay, all right.
So can you tell me what the useful life of this pipeline is and what happens to that when you guys abandon it? Whether you go out of business or it wears out or whatever?
Yeah, well, it won't wear out. So again, the PHMSA requirements is there's a certain design life, which I think is 25 years. But there's pipelines that have been in service for decades. I mean, there's a refined products pipeline that I used to be responsible for that starts in Louisiana and goes to the East Coast. Moves 600,000 gallons of gasoline every day, and was put in the 50s. So as long as you maintain them, design them, construct them, and operate and maintain them well, you know, the design life is significant. And if we ever take the pipeline out of service, there's Iowa state law that dictates very clearly our obligations with respect to the pipeline and yours as a landowner.
And what is that?
Ultimately, the ownership reverts back to you, and you can tell us as a company, I don't want it on my property, we have to remove the pipeline.
But the thought there would be, let's say, hypothetically, 50 years from now, right? The question would be, does the landowner want the soil disturbed again, right? That's the question that the landowner would have. But there is state law that dictates exactly how that process goes.
And I have a second question in terms of land value. What is the, reduced land value if I want to sell my farm with this thing running through it? And you guys have to run some numbers on that.
So the easement moves with the landowner. So if you sell the land to another landowner, that easement just flows with the...
I got paid, he's not going to get anything for it, and he's got this hazardous thing running through this property that he's going to buy from me. So it's kind of like radon, okay, does it reduce the value of my property because it's there?
I mean, so you would get the upfront easement payment.
Yeah, she's asking, is the pipeline going to reduce the value of the property?
Right, yeah, somebody has to run.
All I know is because we've done some analysis on property value in general, and it's not, the property values aren't going down in the state of Iowa.
Well, I know they aren't, but at some point, does that reduce the percentage of value of my property because it exists there? And obviously, if there's not an answer.
Well, I think it depends on the property and the use of the property, etc. So it's probably unique.
Top quality egg.
I mean, I could make the argument the other way.
I can't speak to any specific parcel.
I mean, I would make the argument the other way. If you have ethanol,
It's going to increase the value of my land because I have a hazardous pipeline running through it?
If 54% of corn, in the state of Iowa, goes to ethanol plants, and ethanol plants can't compete, and you go from $5-6 corn to 54% less corn getting bought, that's a significant issue. And so that's what we are trying to do with regards to the future of agriculture is make ethanol and agriculture competitive in the low carbon world. That's the basic.
But as the price of corn goes up, your profits go down, the ethanol plants go down. So as farmers, we're gonna take a hit, because if it's corn's so expensive, you're not gonna be profitable. So I mean, it's a balance, so just common sense.
Ma'am, I'd just like to point out one thing too. In your packet, there is about 5-6 pages in, it says 479B, and that has the information in there about end of life concerning the pipeline. So that's the Iowa code that addresses that.
Good afternoon. My name is Ron. I'm with the Contractors Laborers Training Fund. We train workers in Nebraska and the western third of Iowa. I did hear you, and I just want to make sure I'm correct. You guys are going to hire local workers from the state of Iowa. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much for that job creation. Appreciate it.
Any final questions for the IUB or the company? Yep, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Sonia Johnson, and maybe to me this is a little bit of an oxymoron, but it seems like we're taking carbon emissions out of the air and we want to put it in the ground. And after we've listened to all this today, I'm just curious as to how many of you in here are really for this being put in our heartland. Raise your hand. You want it in or you want it out? Put it out. Put your hand up. You want it out. Don't want it. Don't want it. Let's let them know. Oh, thanks.
I have a question. I don't think I need to go to Mike, but what is the whole purpose is to, thank you, Bill, is the whole purpose to put the carbon into the ground permanently, or just to get it there temporarily so that you can then increase the value of ethanol?
It's permanently sequestered.
It's to put it in permanently, but the intent is to increase the value of ethanol.
So this place in North Dakota will just keep acquiring more and more and more of the carbon that you send there, and you're spending millions and billions of dollars to just
North
hide it away?
So North Dakota has enough capacity to take all of the carbon in the United States, all of it. So not just our project, all of it. When we're currently 9 million tons a year. We're planning to go to 12 million. They have 250 billion tons of capacity. So that could take all, they could take all of the carbon in the United States produced for the next 50 years. There are Illinois has sequestration, parts of Nebraska, South Dakota, Canada. There's quite a bit of land that has sequestration ability up there.
I guess I don't understand the purpose behind it.
Any other questions?
So you had a standing 50-foot easement, you come back and want to put a second pipeline in. Are you paying any crop damage again to these farmers for re-entry onto those properties?
Well, I think, ma'am, we would have to go through the IUB process again. The answer is yes. But we don't intend to do that, so we're trying to design a pipeline now so that it'll accommodate any future growth, and so we don't have to come back and disturb your property. But if we did and you agreed to that, then we would have to pay those damages, yes.
And then If my understanding is correct, the permit would initially be given to your company is good for 25 years. Is it an automatic renewal of that permit, or what process would they go through at the 25-year mark?
They'd have to reapply for renewal after 25 years.
And would they have had to do something wrong in order for it not to be automatically renewed with them? Or how does that work?
So I have not been through that process, but we can get you that information. In fact, I don't know where Chuck's at right now, one of my engineers has probably been through that process. If you wanted to stick around afterwards, we could visit with you about that.
Thank you.
There's a coal-fired plant in Springfield, Missouri that was just newly constructed in the last 5 years. The engineer, one of the head engineers of that project told me that the air coming out of that plant is purer than the air coming in. Now, I'm wondering, why can't we use that same technology on the ethanol plants?
Good question. My wife's from Springfield, Missouri, so she should have prepped me for that. I mean, obviously there's technology. The U.S. is on the forefront of technology for clean emissions, cleaner emissions. So, I mean, we don't have control of what the ethanol plants may or may not do. So this is just one opportunity for them to reduce their emissions.
Again, any further questions? If you want some more information from the Iowa Utilities Board, again, I do have staff in the back. We can collect your information and get responses to you. As I stated earlier, the company, the land agents, they will all be here at the conclusion of this meeting as well. So, all right, so as I just stated, at the conclusion of the questions, we did check our checklist. They have met all the different requirements for having the public information meeting. And as landowners, you have the right to ask Summit Carbon to address your concerns through changes to the route or to make other changes. The negotiation process is that time to request such changes and to address any concerns you might have. It is usually very helpful to be specific with your request or your concerns. The requirements of Iowa Code Section 479B, they have been satisfied by the presentation and discussion completed here today. Summit Carbon may now begin negotiations with landowners for easements or other property interests for this project located within the county. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
And I would just remind everyone to please visit with the land agents.
Okoboji broadcast from the studios at historic Arnold's Park Amusement Park is brought to you in part by the headquarters of the University of Okoboji is at the Three Sons, open Monday through Saturday 10 to 5 and Sunday from 10 to 4. The Scott Troutman State Farm Agency in Spirit Lake. Quest Wealth Management, a financial advisory practice of Ameriprise Financial Services. Advisor Jan Spielman, AJ Spielman, and Erica Wachholz. Ducky's Marine and Motorsports Repair in Spirit Lake. Bank Midwest, dream big, plan wisely, live well. Lakes Regional Healthcare and Avera Partner. Ruthven Locker at the Lake, where carnivores are welcome on Hill Avenue in Spirit Lake. Beck Engineering in Spirit Lake. Be Radiant Laser Skin Studio in the Okoboji Plaza in Okoboji.